Chapter 1. The Fall from Grace. When Abby Thornton stepped onto Horizon Airways Flight 762, she was a woman at the pinnacle of her career. A celebrated entrepreneur, a first-class ticket holder, and someone who had clawed her way to success through sheer grit and brilliance. Abby carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged. But by the time the plane touched down, she would be dragged from her seat, publicly shamed, and stripped of the status she'd rightfully earned, all because someone decided she didn't fit their narrow vision of who deserved to be there. What they didn't realize was that they'd chosen the wrong target. This isn't just the story of a flight gone wrong. It's about power, control, and the breaking point where injustice ignites a fire. By the end of this ordeal, careers will lie in ruins, reputations will crumble, and the world will witness Abby flip the script in a way no one could have predicted. So, ask yourself, if you were in her shoes, would you fight back, or let them win? Chapter 2. The First Cracks. Abby settled into seat 2A, smoothing the crisp lines of her tailored charcoal blazer. The first-class cabin buzzed softly with the hum of privileged chatter, the clink of champagne flutes, and the faint scent of leather upholstery. For a moment, it was a sanctuary, a reward for years of sleepless nights and relentless ambition. But that calm was fleeting. Across the aisle, a man in seat 3C, James Carver, watched her with a smirk that oozed arrogance. His sharp eyes glinted with something Abby knew all too well, disdain dressed up as amusement. Well, he drawled, leaning back in his seat. Didn't think I'd see you up here. Abby kept her composure, her voice cool and steady. Last I checked, it's a free country, James. He chuckled, a low, mocking sound. Guess the bar's lower than I thought. Before she could fire back, a flight attendant, Lydia Grayson, approached. Her face was a mask of professionalism, but there was a stiffness in her movements, a hesitation that set Abby's instincts on edge. Ma'am, Lydia said, her tone clipped, could I see your boarding pass again? Abby's brow furrowed. I scanned it at the gate. Is something wrong? Lydia's eyes flicked over her shoulder, and Abby followed her gaze. Near the cockpit stood Captain Michael Vaughn, arms crossed, his face a stonewall. Just a routine check, Lydia said, too quickly. We've had some mix-ups recently. The explanation rang hollow, but Abby handed over her phone anyway. Lydia studied the digital boarding pass, her fingers tightening around the device for a split second before she returned it. Looks fine, she said, though her voice wavered, betraying her words. She retreated down the aisle, leaving Abby with a growing knot of unease. From the seat opposite, an older woman, Evelyn Harper, a seasoned traveler with silver hair and a sharp gaze, leaned toward Abby. Don't let it get to you, she whispered. I've seen this nonsense before. It's shameful. Abby offered a small, grateful nod. I don't bend for anyone, she replied quietly. But the flicker of solidarity was a brief candle in the wind. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. Minutes later, Lydia returned, this time with a second flight attendant in tow, Ethan Brooks, a lanky man with nervous eyes. Ms. Thornton, Lydia began, her tone now stiff and formal. I'm afraid there's an issue with your ticket. Abby arched an eyebrow. An issue? You just verified it. It seems your seat was double booked, Lydia said, avoiding eye contact. We need you to move to another section until we resolve it. Abby's jaw tightened. Another section? You mean economy? James Carver let out a smug chuckle. Looks like your joyride's over, sweetheart. Abby shot him a glare that could have melted steel, but before she could respond, Evelyn Harper rose from her seat. She's not going anywhere, Evelyn snapped, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. This is harassment, plain and simple. Why wasn't she told before takeoff? Why is she the only one singled out? Ethan glanced at Lydia, his unease palpable, but Lydia straightened her spine. Mrs. Harper, please stay out of this. We're trying to avoid further disruption. Abby took a slow, deliberate breath. She saw the crossroads ahead, roll over and let them trample her, or stand her ground. And Abigail Thornton didn't roll over for anyone. She reached into her sleek leather bag and pulled out her phone. I need to make a call. Lydia smirked. No signal up here, I'm afraid. Abby turned her phone to reveal a document glowing on the screen, her Horizon Airways shareholder credentials, complete with her name in bold. The smirk evaporated from Lydia's face. Ethan paled. Even James's grin faltered. Care to explain again how my seat's double booked? Abby asked, her voice a calm, lethal edge. Chapter 4. The Public Shaming. The intercom crackled to life, shattering the standoff. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising at 35,000 feet, and I need to address a security concern. Abby's breath caught. Captain Vaughn's voice rolled on, cold and deliberate. We've identified a passenger posing potential risks to onboard safety. As a precaution, we're conducting an internal review. A heavy silence blanketed the cabin, then erupted into whispers that spread like wildfire. Abby's pulse hammered in her ears. She knew exactly what they were doing, painting her as a threat, turning the passengers against her. A shadow fell beside her. Lydia was back, this time with a broad-shouldered man in uniform, Air Marshal Ryan Kessler. Ms. Thornton, Lydia said, her voice dripping with crocodile tears, we need you to come with us. Abby's stomach lurched. Come with you? For what? A security evaluation, Kessler replied, his tone flat and unyielding. James Carver's smirk twisted into something cruel. Told you that seat wouldn't last. Abby's fists clenched, nails digging into her palms. This wasn't about safety, it was a calculated humiliation, a public guillotine drop. When she'd boarded Flight 762, she'd been a titan of industry, a first-class passenger who'd earned every inch of her place. Now, they were trying to erase her, all because she didn't match their mold. But they'd underestimated her. Abby Thornton wasn't just a passenger, she was a force. And as the world would soon see, she'd turned their game upside down, leaving wreckage in her wake. The question lingered in the air. If this were you, would you let them break you, or would you make them pay? Expanded narrative continued. The cabin lights seemed to dim as the weight of the moment pressed down. Passengers craned their necks, some with curiosity, others with judgment already etched into their faces. Abby felt the heat of their stares, but she refused to shrink. She'd built her empire brick by brick, boardroom battles, late-night negotiations, and countless doors slammed in her face. She'd never let anyone take that away, least of all on a cramped plane at 35,000 feet. Security evaluation? Abby repeated, her voice rising just enough to carry. Based on what evidence? Kessler shifted his weight, his expression unreadable. Standard procedure, ma'am. Please cooperate. Standard procedure doesn't target one passenger without cause, Evelyn interjected, her tone sharp enough to draw a few gasps from nearby seats. This is a disgrace. Lydia's facade cracked for a moment, irritation flickering in her eyes, but she quickly smoothed it over. We're following protocol, Mrs. Harper. Let's not escalate this. Escalate. Abby laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're the ones dragging me out of my seat after confirming my ticket twice. If this is protocol, it's broken. Kessler stepped closer, his presence looming. Ma'am, I won't ask again. Come with us. Abby met his gaze, unflinching. She could feel the tide turning, the passengers' whispers growing louder, their phones subtly angled to capture the drama. She wasn't just fighting for her seat now, she was fighting for her dignity, her reputation, everything she'd built. And she'd be damned if she let them win. Fine, she said at last, standing with deliberate grace. But this doesn't end here. As she followed Kessler toward the rear of the plane, James's voice slithered after her. Enjoy the cheap seats. She didn't turn back, but her mind was already racing. She'd spent years mastering the art of leverage, knowing when to push, when to pull, and when to strike. Horizon Airways had just handed her the match. All she needed was the spark. The aftermath, foreshadowing. Back in first class, Evelyn watched with a mix of fury and admiration as Abby disappeared down the aisle. She'd seen too many women like her, brilliant, capable, and unfairly targeted, crumple under less. But Abby? Abby was different. Evelyn could sense it in the set of her shoulders, the steel in her voice. This wasn't a surrender, it was a strategic retreat. Meanwhile, Lydia and Kessler exchanged uneasy glances. They'd followed orders, but something about this felt off, like they'd just kicked a hornet's nest. Captain Vaughn remained silent in the cockpit, his earlier announcement hanging like a guillotine blade. And James Carver? He leaned back with a satisfied grin, oblivious to the storm brewing just out of sight. By the time Flight 762 landed, the footage would be viral, clips of Abby's calm defiance, Evelyn's fiery defense, and the crew's fumbling excuses lighting up social media. Careers would unravel. Lawsuits would loom. And Abby Thornton would emerge not as a victim, but as a reckoning. So, what would you do? Bow under the weight of their power, or rise and rewrite the ending?